Hi, everyone. Welcome to this workshop. Apologies for the technical issues, but I think that's being resolved and done now. So really excited about this workshop. I think all of us who are giving the workshop are all from INSPIRE. So there will be a lot of plugs for INSPIRE throughout the workshop, including some recent funding opportunities. So would love to share that with you. So here's a Dropbox link. We will be going through some mock proposals later in the breakout groups towards the end of the workshop. And so if you can go to this link, it'll have the mock proposals. It has some additional resources, notes, and these slides. So feel free to start going to that link, and we'll have the mock proposals ready there. And if Dropbox doesn't work, here's a Google Drive too. I know people at CHOP can access it, but for everyone else that can, there's two different options. It goes to the same content. So hopefully either one of those will work. So that's in the chat. You can access it anytime. So here's the structure of the workshop. We'll do some introductions in a poll first to kind of get a pulse on kind of where everyone's at and kind of where you are in planning research, or if you're an experienced researcher, or kind of why you're here. And then we'll go through some slides about how to put a successful proposal together and some of the basic concepts of grant writing or proposal writing. And then we'll have a panel discussion with some Q&A afterwards. And then we'll do we're going to simulate some mock proposals and simulate a study section. So there'll be two different proposals that we'll review based on kind of where you're at. There will be a novice and kind of early researcher group using a proposal that was kind of a smaller proposal for INSPIRE. And then there will be a kind of more experienced research group breakout session that'll go over the more kind of advanced level of proposals. So there'll be two different breakout groups. I'm just trying to look through the attendees, and we'll probably just do two groups and can have the breakout sessions in those two groups. And then we'll report out and then have some Q&A at the end. So here are the objectives for the workshop. First is to understand the funding opportunities and the peer review process. Second is to review the components of a proposal. And then lastly, we'll simulate the grant review process. So hopefully when you walk away from this, you'll at least know of some different funding opportunities, hopefully learn some things from people that have gotten grants and have been on study sections and review panels before, and have some resources at the end through Dropbox that'll kind of help you refer back to after the workshop. Sorry, I'm really bad at technology. So here, let's do the faculty introductions. I just put it in alphabetical order. If you can just introduce yourself and any successful grant funding you've gotten or any fun facts. I'll start with Aaron.
Hi, Aaron Calhoun, professor of pediatrics at Norton Children's Hospital, University of Louisville, pediatric intensivist by training, outgoing chair of INSPIRE. And I guess as far as grants are concerned, one of the more interesting ones that I'm on now is a corporate grant from Sanofi looking at using simulation to measure levels of vaccine hesitancy and creating like a standardized patient environment for doing that. I'm not the PI, I'm just the methodologist to kind of help design the assessment methods and stuff. But it's been pretty neat, actually. It's a neat grant. Happy to tell anybody about our progress with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I want to hear more. Isabel?
That sounds awesome, Aaron. I really want to hear about this. Isabel Gross, pediatric emergency medicine at Yale. My experience with grants is that I'm the outgoing scientific review chair for INSPIRE, so I've seen quite a few grants come through. I also have had successful grant submissions myself. I think what I can maybe add to this group is how to manage international collaborations when you have funding in one institution and working with many other centers. very excited about this, being part of this workshop.
Thanks, Isabel. David?
Hi, everyone. Dave Kessler, Pediatric ER at Columbia. I guess what I bring to the table is all the grant failures I've had multiple times. I'm only successful if I'm on with Travis or one of these other guys. But I have had success, I think, cutting my teeth on some of the harder, like NIH type style grants and all the work that goes into those, and then turning around and applying the same principles of storytelling directly to companies. So I have had some sort of, particularly in my ultrasound world, funding for artificial intelligence and ultrasound work by just applying these principles and reaching out directly to the sponsor.
Awesome. Vinay?
Hi, Vinay Nadkarni, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Probably have the distinction of failing on more grants than anybody else on the panel. So I just sort of iterate that you got to send them in and you got to try in order to get. But the viewpoint that I hope to offer is that having seen sort of NIH and AHRQ, sort of government, non-government, NGO, philanthropic, and corporate, there's a slightly different structure to each one of those, and maybe discussing a little bit about how one configures the different type of portfolio.
Awesome. Akira?
Hi, everyone. My name is Akira Nishisaki. I'm one of the PQ attending and co-medical director at CHOP. My experience with the grant, mainly with HRQ and also some with NIH. Actually, my first experience was actually simulation grant through the HRQ. And I also was, until recently, I was in the study section of the HRQ. So what I can share is probably the grant reviewers' perspective that, how it's perceived as opposed to how you try to deliver a message to it. Thanks.
Awesome. Kim?
Hi, everyone. Kim Stone, Seattle Children's Hospital and University of Washington School of Medicine, and incoming chair for INSPIRE. And my experience with grants is actually a lot more internal. We were very fortunate to have faculty beginning career grants available at Seattle Children's that as I was getting started, and they still continue, that really kind of launched things for me. And then there's been some other smaller grants that have been available through University of Washington patient safety grants and things like that. And then I've had the benefit of being sort of a subcontractor on several of the express related projects, and that became INSPIRE as well, in collaborating with all of these great folks.
Awesome. And great, thanks Kim, and thanks everyone. So I'm Travis. I am the awards and funding committee chair for INSPIRE, and I am a pediatric emergency medicine researcher at Yale. And I also do some biotech stuff that's unrelated to my academic work, but I've had a number of different grants from NIH, DOD, NSF, DARPA, foundation grants, different kinds. I think the most interesting one is that I recently got is a $15 million contract with DARPA to develop bioengineered mosquito repellents. So it's a really cool project, totally unrelated to simulation, but some really cool stuff. So that's my background. So we wanted to do a survey and just kind of gauge what level of research people are. If you're a completely novice researcher with no proposal in mind, you're just here to learn. If you are a novice researcher but have something specific in mind, or if you're kind of more experienced researcher, would love to hear from everyone. We'll do the poll. There we go. Great. Okay, awesome. I think most people have answered. It's kind of split evenly, it looks like. looks like about 60% are kind of novice, half don't have a proposal in mind, half do, and then about a third are experienced researcher. So that's great. I think maybe we'll do 3 breakout rooms later on, 2 novice and 1 kind of more experienced based on that. Great, thanks so much. So now to dive into kind of some slides and background on kind of general comments here. So most of the content of the slides is we try to make it generalizable, whether it's NIH, INSPIRE, or a foundation grant. And just kind of note that some of the requirements are variable in terms of the different documentation, the preparation, all that kind of stuff. So hopefully these are kind of more broad comments that will help prepare whatever proposal that you're putting together. And so I think to start off, I think that to have a winning proposal and to get grant funding, I think you need to have a vision. What are you excited about? What are you working on that you can kind of tell people in 30 seconds? And what really needs to come through is that you're excited about the work and you're excited about the project that you're doing. I think a pitfall that I've seen a lot of people do is that they'll try to find a specific grant opportunity. Like there was one for the NICHD with simulation, and people tried to come up with an idea to fit that proposal. But in my experience, I think it's the other way around that's more successful. You have a really good idea, and then you go find the right fit for it. That's a funding opportunity. And people may feel differently, but that's how I've always done it, is that I'm really excited about something. And then, for example, the Department of Defense was funding our basic research, and normally they're not really a funder of research, but we went to them and they really like our proposal and gave us $500,000. So I think it's better to have a proposal and an idea first and have that vision, and then look for opportunities. So there are different funding agencies available. I'm sorry that this is kind of US specific, but there's INSPIRE, there's the Macy Foundation, Our Baby, and of course, all these federal agencies that you can look for. And like I said, the DoD, I mean, if you think about the US, the Department of Defense has the largest budget. And they actually have a lot of research grants available for people. And they actually have funded simulation-based research before. So I think when you think about different federal institutions, don't leave them out in kind of what you're looking for. And then, before you start, I think it takes a lot of time to prepare once you have an idea. Like if you're going to a federal agency, there is always a program officer. Look up who that is, like in NICHD, that's pediatric specific, or others. Having a relationship with that person is important to get a sense of what they are looking for, because these funding agencies, and this is true for like the Macy Foundation and other agencies that are non-federal, they have what's important to them and what they want to fund, and you want to kind of make sure that you're aligned. And I've had really great experiences with program officers. One time, I was talking to 2 different NIH institutes, the NIAID and NIAMS. And then NIAMS wasn't able to fund it, but because I had a relationship with NIAID, they were able to kind of pick up the proposal from NIAMS and fund it. So it's because I had the relationship with the program officers that that grant, which was my first one when I was like 22 or something, got funded. And it's really helpful to have that relationship. And I'm sorry, I'm not able to keep up with all the comments, but there's some really great feedback from all of the faculty. Thank you so much. So here are the specific funding opportunities that I think we kind of identified that are relevant. The first one that I want to highlight is from INSPIRE. This is a diversity, equity, and inclusion award that came from donations at the board level. And we had originally had the deadline for August 31st, but we decided to extend it to give people more time and to highlight it at right now for IPSS. So it's up to $10,000. Go to inspiresim.org and you'll be able to find more information there. And these slides are also in Dropbox and the Google Drive that I shared. But that's really great opportunity for using SIM to study DEI, or using some kind of research-based methodology, even qualitative, to kind of improve DEI in simulation. So that's still available. There's only 2 weeks left, so it's a little bit short of a deadline, but consider it if you are able to. There's also a novice research award from the Society of Simulation Healthcare. There's some funding opportunities with simulation within the NIH. And NICHT is the child health within the institute within NIH. And so that's often the most relevant. But a lot of our investigators can go through the Blood Institute as well that does like resuscitation and stuff. But NICHT is a really good fit a lot of times, and they have a lot of good opportunities. There's a Society of Academic Medicine, emergency medicine that has novice research grants. AHRQ funds a lot of simulation research. I've been on a couple ARC projects before, including in targeted issues grants that they have routinely, but they also have some other grants. And unfortunately, the one that they had for sim research has expired, but be on the lookout for renewal for that. And also there's a European Society of Pediatric and Neonatal Intensive Care. And also, like, when I'm looking for opportunities, again, I have an idea looking for opportunities. I go to grants.gov to look for federal opportunities. And there's also a lot of times institutional funding. So I've been on grants on institutional awards at Yale. I think we got one for like $10,000 from the Clinical Center of Investigation. And there's also sometimes training grants, K awards, things like that, that are for kind of novice researchers. A lot of times they have internal funding. So definitely check within your institution. I don't know about your institution, but Yale has, with our department, they send out like a monthly or a weekly funding opportunities list, and pay attention to that. I'm really briefly, I think, when you think of NIH awards, R21 is kind of an exploratory award. So is an R03. But in R01 is kind of a larger project. And I'll just really quickly say, the R03s are evaluated in the same study sections as R01s. So they are typically harsher to them because they're looking at R01s and they're very competitive. But I think a much better alternative is an R21. That's an exploratory research grant. And that one has more funding available too. So it's a $275,000 budget. So oftentimes when we're doing a pilot project, looking to get some preliminary data, R21, I think, is really great. So here are the elements. This is just, an NIH application, lots of different parts, but we're just going to focus on the core elements that are generalizable to whatever funding opportunity you're looking for, which is really the specific aims and the research strategy. So in my opinion, the specific aims page is the most important page of the entire application. I've been in study sections at NCI and have been part of the peer review process. And I think this is the number one most important element, I believe, because it's a single page. It tells the reviewers exactly what you aim to do, gives a summary of, kind of your project. And this is the very first thing I start on of any grant proposal that I write, because if you can't hone in on the aims and what you want to achieve and what your hypotheses are, then it doesn't matter the rest of your application. And so I what I usually do is kind of draft this first. I'll send it around to the different co-PIs or co-Is on the project, really get feedback. Then I can send that to the program officer, get their feedback. And it's a great way to kind of shop around your proposal to different people. And it's you know, I think the most important thing, and then the rest kind of falls into place. So yeah, I think when you're doing an introduction in the specific aims, describe the problem, you know, capture your vision, and then engage the reviewer with a strong hypothesis or whatever goal that you're trying to achieve. And I think, you know, the hardest part about this is doing it succinctly and trying to make it concise. And here are aims. I think every proposal, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, needs to have specific aims. You know, often I think they should be measurable. They are, you know, kind of endpoints. They're narrow, precise, tangible, and they use SMART objectives: specific, measurable, realistic, and time-bound. And I think that applies to pretty much any proposal that you have, because that's, you know, you need to be able to show what you're actually trying to do and measure. And so some general tips for quantitative studies: don't state a hypothesis you can't test with experiments you're proposing. I typically avoid hypothesis generating studies. This is kind of more for scientists, but you know, I try to avoid that. For qualitative studies, be clear in the methodology and data collection and how you analyze the qualitative data. And I think overall, don't be overly ambitious. I've gotten this feedback so many times where I'm trying to do too much in a single proposal. And I learned pretty early on that keeping it very achievable and very tangible is much more likely to succeed, because reviewers want to make sure that what you're actually proposing can actually be achieved. So one time, you know, I was proposing a study with all of these animal experiments, with, you know, in vitro experiments, all this kind of stuff, and within 6 months, it was just not feasible, and we didn't get funded. So that would be my takeaway. And avoid these phrases like to correlate or to describe, to develop. You know, they need to be measurable in the aims that you're trying to test. And then for quantitative studies, especially and for NIH, this is probably less relevant for like INSPIRE funding or some other types of funding. But whenever I'm a reviewer for like NCI or whatever, I really don't like to see codependency on aims. So just using COVID as an example, like, you know, aim 1 would be to establish a mouse model for testing a compound. Aim 2 is to test a compound on that mouse model. So aim 2 is heavily dependent on the success of aim 1. Making a mouse model is actually really difficult. Can fail all the time. And if you don't achieve aim 1, you can't achieve aim 2. So make sure that they're not relying on each other. And, you know, I think sometimes too, people will say like, first they'll design a study and second they'll execute it. And I think instead of doing that, say, we are going to design this study. Aim 1 is to have this endpoint. Aim 2 is to have this endpoint, like an increase in CPR quality. And aim 2 would be an increase in CPR compliance, something like that. That you kind of layer the study design in the background, and then you have measurable aims within that study design. That's how I like to approach aims.
Hey, Travis.
Yes.
Can I throw a thought out on that one real quick too?
Please, yeah.
I have a very relevant simulation-based example of this to help everybody see the importance that came from the study that I was on, that I was talking about. So we did not have an assessment tool to measure vaccine behaviors, just didn't exist. And we wanted to train vaccine behaviors. So the equivalence here would be to say to develop and validate a tool for the assessment of vaccine-related behaviors in the simulated environment. And then the aim 2 would be to implement a simulation-based curriculum for altering vaccine-related behaviors and assessing it using that tool. I will tell you that's exactly what we did because we didn't have the time to do it any other way. but
And it
it
got
caused
funded?
trouble. And I told
Oh.
everybody in the study that was going to cause trouble. So I knew it was going to happen. And so Travis is right, but that's a simulation-based example. And I think people do that all the time.
Yeah, thanks for that example. And I think it's a simple way of kind of reframing the aims, that you have a tool, you just assume a tool is developed. Hopefully you have some pilot data of some validity evidence, and then you can say, you know, aim one or aim two.
Or make them separate studies.
Yeah. With COVID, I think there's probably more lenient seats for expedited stuff. Yeah, so kind of moving on from the specific aims, which I think is you know, one of the most important parts. The second most important part is the actual research strategy and how you aim to achieve the study. So, you know, this is the NIH style, but I think it's very useful regardless of what application you're funding for. This is also true for INSPIRE. It has three major parts: significance, innovation, and approach. And we'll go through it quickly. So the significance, when I first started NIH grants and kind of applying for funding, I honestly didn't understand the difference between significance and innovation. They seemed overlapping to me, but I think now I have a better grasp of kind of what the difference is. But I think with the significance, you kind of need to highlight what the problem or what the current state of the art is in whatever problem that you're trying to address. And describe the current gaps and problems in the field. Why is this important? What have other studies done that needs to be done that kind of sets your proposal up? And in other words, why does this matter? And a lot of times, you know, when you're not applying to NICHD and you're applying to other institutes, you can just say that, you know, we're doing this for kids, and that's reason enough that that's important, because you know, the translatability from adult medicine to pediatrics is difficult. So a lot of times that alone will kind of address, you know, some of the significance problems, but, you know, kind of going beyond that, looking at the current gaps and problems in the field. So just some tips. You know, I would kind of amplify some of the paragraphs that you started to state in the specific aims. Why is this important? You know, demonstrate significant need in medicine, in science, qualitative measure and intervention. And in every proposal, this is just what I do just to help the reviewers, but I bold the last sentence of each section and say, this study is significant because blah, blah, blah. And I think it's a little bit rudimentary, but I think it's effective to kind of really draw the reviewer to see why this work is important. And same thing for innovation. So for innovation, it's different than significance. Innovation is any novelty in the theoretical concepts, approaches, methodology, instrumentation, or interventions. I think a really good you know, kind of example within simulation is using like eye tracking technology. And we have a proposal that will use that in the mock proposals that we do. Another one is kind of using, you know, novel different technologies, novel, you know, telesimulation, things like that. So within simulation, you know, how is it novel? How is it differentiated? And same thing, you know, how does this kind of shift the current research practice? And then again, I would say this study is innovative because blah, blah, blah. So here's the approach section, the kind of a meat of the methodology. So I always restate specific aims, excuse me, because at least in NIH and even in INSPIRE, you know, you have to go back up to the specific aims to kind of reorient yourself. And it's really helpful to just to kind of literally copy and paste and restate the aims for the reviewer to make it more understandable. And then I would describe the overall strategy and methodology of the study. And then I literally write methods for specific aim one, and then repeat the specific aim again. So this is the third time, and then go through rationale, experimental design and methods, and then hypothesis or criteria for success. Hypothesis may be less so for a qualitative study, but still important for, very important for quantitative studies. And then criteria is for success. You know, what does success look like versus what you're measuring? And then statistical analysis and interpretation is the next section. And then I think this is really important, but highlighting pitfalls, potential problems, and alternative strategies. I can't tell you the number of times that I've gotten knocked from reviewers because, well, did you think about this problem? Or did you have a plan if this doesn't work? And it's like, of course we did, but you know, they want to be able to see that you've thought of everything. So think of what can go wrong. What if the sample size is too small? What if what you're measuring, the measurement tool, doesn't have enough validity evidence, things like that. At least acknowledge some of the limitations. It's just the same thing as like a limitations section in your manuscripts. Yeah, and awesome comments. Thanks everyone for helping with the chat. You know, I like to have Gantt charts. I'm a very visual person. So these are two examples of different Gantt charts that I put together. And I like the first one better. This is for a lab-based grant that I got funded. But this is, I like to break it down by aim. So, you know, aim 1 and aim 2, what activities are going on when, and have it, you know, some sub aims or activities under each aim. That's just how I like to do it. It doesn't really matter, but I think that's kind of the most effective approach that I've done.
Sorry, can I say one funny thing?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, the Gantt chart is also helpful when you develop the grant. By when, what you need to do, by when you need to finalize specific game page, you know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say a very general comment that, you know, writing a grant really helps you think through the whole study. It is remarkably effective at actually thinking through the whole study, writing it all out, doing the Gantt charts. I mean, you know, there's been some cases where we put together the grants and we didn't get it, but it was so helpful to have like an entire plan that we just did it without funding, and really helps kind of, you know, help everyone think through the practicalities, some of the, you know, logistics and things like that, that you wouldn't necessarily think through if you're not actually writing it all out. So, so just some general comments on the approach. If you have any preliminary data, you know, some people will say it differently, but I usually do this under the methodology for each aim. So some people do it under significance or under innovation. Some people put it at the beginning of the methodology section. I just put it wherever it's most relevant. So, you know, I usually do this in the methodology for each aim. And I think having preliminary data is really important, but it's not required. You know, especially if it's for like an INSPIRE grant or something like that, where you're aiming to do a pilot study, it's really hard to have preliminary data, so that's totally okay. You know, I think that, you know, if you're going for an NIH grant, they like to see some kind of preliminary data if you have it. Let's see, potential pitfalls, again, I think is important. Vertebrate animals aren't really relevant. And yeah, just make sure that the proposed experiments are feasible. So yeah, just to kind of summarize, do the experiments relate to the specific aims? Are they logical? Are they integrated? Are the statistical analysis included? Definitely include sample size analysis. That is so important, I think, when you're looking at a sim-based study and you need to look at how many participants or how many sites to include. It just shows the reviewers that you've thought through what kind of delta you're expecting, and then how many people based on that delta, and make sure that it's well calculated. And I think also, is there a sensible timeline? Again, this kind of goes back to feasibility and make sure that you can actually achieve it. So I wanted to put in some budget considerations, very wide variation and kind of budget considerations depending on your institution, depending on the entity that you're applying to. But effort, at least in NIH, is defined by calendar months, not by percent anymore. So just keep that in mind of calendar months. And if you need protected time, include that in your effort. And if you don't need protected time, like if you're 100% clinical, or if you're a nurse or a researcher or whatever, that's less important. But if you do, include your calendar months as your effort. And then fringe benefits will be calculated by your institution. Usually they have a flat rate. And then what's really important is indirect costs. Indirect costs are basically like a fee that the institution places on your grants, and it could be really gnarly. Yale's, I think, is not that bad at 65%, but I've worked with institutions as high as 90%. Jackson Labs, Harvard, MIT. So it's really egregious. And so, think about the funding opportunity. If it's a federal grant, they have pre-negotiated rates with each federal entity. So there's really not that much flexibility in what you can do. But there are some grants that are, I can't remember which specific ones, but I think it's some K awards that are just $100,000, and then they'll also pay indirect costs. But most grants, like in R21, for example, will be, it's $250,000, and that includes indirects. So whatever your budget is, you have to multiply that by 1.65 or 0.65, 0.9, whatever, to add to your direct cost budget. And then what's really important, what I want to drive home to everyone, is that if you're applying for an INSPIRE grant, or if you're applying for some other foundational funding, they don't pay indirects. And that's usually totally okay. But just check with your institution, make sure your grants office knows about that and isn't thrown off or caught off guard, because that's really important.
To just add to that, it also varies by department, and depending on how the academic center has set up things like dean's taxes. Some places have a budget all within department where they have to use those indirects from various grants to pay for space and stuff like that. And other places, any amount of funding you bring in, no matter where it's from, gets sort of taxed, and you have to pay to sort of get that money to somewhere else. So for something like an INSPIRE grant, some places might find out after the fact, oh, I thought I was getting 10,000, but I'm only getting 9,500 because they charged me 500. And you really have to work those things out before you apply for a grant that doesn't supply indirects.
I'll also say too that for the INSPIRE grant, I've personally had to go up to bat once or twice with various institutions who are attempting to take indirects, despite the fact that we do not. And we have won that in both cases, but it took basically telling them that I was going to pull a grant from a promising young faculty member at their institution if they were forcing this, because we could not do that. And they relented in both cases. So I don't know about other organizations, but for INSPIRE, if you run into that, we will do that for you.
Absolutely. And I've had the same experience. I had a Teal Foundation grant that didn't pay indirects, and we were collaborating with Jackson Labs. And they were trying to charge us a 90% indirect rate, and we said no, and we won that as well. So, a lot of times they're really flexible if you're firm enough, but just usually not on the federal grants, because they actually have contracts and things with the government. So just some really quick tips on budget. Get your grants office involved early in the process. There have been multiple times that I decided to apply for a grant that was due in a week, and they really hated me. It got done and it got awarded, but I would just say that they weren't happy. And they can actually be super helpful. For me, they helped edit my Biosketch. some institutions, not at ours, but at some other ones, they have some people that will actually review your grants and offer some, actual review and advice, and it's really great. And they'll submit all the paperwork for you. I have submitted personally all of the paperwork for the grants, and it is such an enormous amount of work. I've done that multiple times, kind of separately to the NIH and stuff, and it is so difficult. So be aware that it takes a lot of time, and they're working with a lot of investigators. So give them, 1 to 3 weeks. Give them a lot of notice. I think someone said 60 days. I think that's good. Yeah, Kim. Yeah. I think that's good. And then they'll usually set a deadline for you that's like 2 to 3 weeks in advance of the actual deadline. So keep that in mind. If there's a grant that's due, October 31st, really you need to have everything done by October 15th or so they'll have time to put all the paperwork together. So this is really quick. This is a Biosketch outline that we use for NIH and INSPIRE. This has actually changed. I have a slide in two slides. It just changed this year, so this is a little bit outdated, but more or less the same. There will be like education and experience, a personal statement, position honors, and then what's new from, I think they changed this about 2014 or so, but contributions to science. And it's really cool. You can kind of like tell your own narrative and put your publications under each like theme that you've done. And then you can have your published work in My Bibliography. You can go to PubMed and you can create your own bibliography. So that way they can just click on it and see your full list of publications if you create an account, a free account with PubMed. So, and with PubMed, by the way, they'll also can export that into a Biosketch. They can also export it into a CV. So, it's kind of hard to keep up with, but a lot of it is automated, especially if the papers are PubMed listed.
Travis, I think section D is going away for the 2021, I think, format of Biosketch. Oh,
okay, yeah, you're right. Yep. So no more section D. Okay, that's interesting. And then section B includes scientific appointments in addition to positions and honors. And then, oh yeah, the other support, that's not as relevant. That's closer to when you get the grant. So yeah, I think these are pretty subtle changes, but go to the NIH website and be sure. I uploaded my Biosketch to the Dropbox and to the Google folder. Just as an example of what I've done for a grant in the past. If you want to see an example, feel free to use that and then just adjust with these new criteria. And I think it's an actually important part of the application. So I had mentioned, for an NIH application, there's a significance innovation approach, but there's also investigators and environment that are also part of the scoring system. And so, the investigators actually get some scrutiny, and this helps kind of put your story together and stuff like that. And I will say too, I applied for a ton of grants before I had a PhD, without a PhD, and that wasn't really an issue. And I think a lot of it depended on my Biosketch, of them being able to see, hearing my story, telling the publications and the research that I've done. So, if anyone is novice and intimidated, I think that's not really an issue. It hasn't really been in the past. So I think what they want to see is that you're qualified to do the work, that you have experience, that you've at least presented at conferences or something like that. And also, for some of the stuff that you can kind of list as like publications, those are kind of flexible sometimes. They accept some conferences and they accept other things. So look on the NIH website to double check, but you can add different pieces of work that aren't necessarily peer-reviewed publications. Like for example, they allow like education portal stuff. And then letters of support, I think, are really important. Give them weeks notice in advance, but I think collaborators, support, facility, resources, and very important, if you're applying for an award that's outside of INSPIRE, INSPIRE will write a letter of recommendation for you. And so come to us. I think we'll try to put our contact info in at the end. But reach out to one of us and we can get you a letter of support from INSPIRE that would say that we're supporting the project. That's been helpful in the past. Yeah, but if you have a publication, go make sure to highlight and comment that was INSPIRE funded or something. Okay, so some general style tips. I saw someone mention in the chat to use 11-point Arial. That is definitely my preference. And I set my margins to narrow. I think that's ½ inch. But I think it's important to leave enough white space and don't cram too much. I think that when you're reading something, you have to think about the perspective of the reviewer. If it's like too dense, they'll be really hard to read. And don't be afraid to use figures and colors and illustrations. Someone once told me that you have to do it in black and white. I don't know why, but that's totally not true. With a digital age, you can see anything, and I doubt people print out stuff that much anymore anyway. So, and then my personal preference, this is not required, but I don't include references in the specific games page because I think that just kind of clutters it, but that's just a style thing. And yeah, one of the last remaining points is the NIH and INSPIRE scoring criteria. So this is how we actually measure your proposal. So there will be an overall impact score, and then each of the 5 criteria are evaluated: significance, innovation, investigators, approach, and environment. So the environment is like, is your institution, does it have the right resources, or are you collaborating with institutions that have more resources? We need to hurry up. I'm sorry. Okay. So yeah, that's the NIH scoring criteria. It goes from 1, which is best, to 9, which is the worst. So again, here are some specific funding opportunities. Check out INSPIRE and check out some of these novice researcher awards. So I wanted to open up to panel discussion and any Q&A. Anything that the panelists want to say that you want to highlight, anything you disagree with, anything else to add?
I think the 2 things I would add is just looking at it, like Travis said, from the perspective of the person reading it is really vital. Because if you think about it, these are busy clinicians or busy researchers, and you're putting together a proposal. And I think the applicant's bias to say, I got to put as much stuff in here as I can to support what I'm doing. And I get that. Yet on the other hand, if you're reading it and you see all that stuff, there's actually a chance you're going to start glossing over some of it and maybe missing something that's important. So hitting the high points, focusing on the importance, and trying to make sure that each word tells something meaningful is really crucial to keeping people's focus on what you're doing. Second thing I'd add is the methods really matter, at least the most to me. Like at the end of the day, a qualitative or quantitative study depends on how good the methods are. And so that's the part I tend to go for right after seeing what the aims are, is do the methods match the aims? If they don't, that's an immediate kind of a downgrade in my mind. So
I had a question for the panel. I think for many people, again, like I said in the chat, we're probably not sustaining careers with NIH funding. And so that's a very different role. In simulation community, we might end up being part of one of these grants. So what do you look for in a partner? How can people best support you in this excruciating task of writing? What do you look for in good sort of grant partners? So Vinay, Travis, Akira.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Travis.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask if Isabel can give her perspective on international collaborations and international funding.
Sure. I think that goes hand in hand with looking for a good collaborator. I think it all depends. David, in what your strengths are and what you are already good at. If you are somebody that already is pretty structured and has a good idea of how to write the grant, but you need somebody with more of a visionary big picture idea, or you need a collaborator that will actually be able to conduct the research, I think that forms a strong research team. From my experience with international research teams, it's important that you have a high level of enthusiasm on both ends. And that might feel natural, but it's not always natural. It's very difficult to conduct a project at a distance when the enthusiasm isn't there. Maybe we've all experienced that now with COVID, right? So you really need somebody that has energy behind it. That's something I look for in my partners. Usually I don't even reach out for anyone. I wait for projects to come to me, and then it's best. In regards to specifically challenges, because I know Brittany asked that in the chat as well, or challenges in how to overcome them with international collaborations, research funding can be tricky. Specifically, we had issues with the tax ID and the tax numbers that you need that are very America-centric. The way we've gotten around it is that we simplified it and just had an American center, meaning Yale in this case, get the money and then do so-called sub-awards and send sub-awards to institutions so they can still manage their own expenses. It's not that they have to send every single receipt to me and I have to approve it, but rather creating sub-awards. That has really helped us. I will say that if you are an international applicant in the sense of not American, it's just how this world still works. Be aware of it, be ready for a little bit more bureaucracy. Yeah, so those are my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, and one thing to add to David's question is, you know, for me, when I first started off and was super, you know, novel in my career, I partnered with a very senior researcher who helped kind of add like some credibility to the research team. So if you're like super novice, pairing up with like a really senior person, that's been great for me. Are there any questions in the chat? We have extended the session to 3:25 Eastern, so another 25 minutes due to technical difficulties. But I kind of want to leave some time for the breakout session. So let's go ahead and move there. So there'll be 3 groups. There'll be 2 groups of novice early research facilitators. So we'll split those up into 2 different groups. And then the more experienced researchers will be in a separate group. So we'll have 2 different proposals to review for each one based on kind of where you're at on the poll. So, and to kind of orient you, again, please go to the Google Drive. Or the, sorry, I just sent to, I meant to send to everyone. There's a Google Drive, go to the Google Drive. You can download either the novice or the advanced researcher proposal based on what you're going with. And so what we'll be doing is you'll read the proposal for a few minutes. We'll try to do it as quickly as possible. And then we'll have a discussion about significance, innovation approach, and overall score. And you'll try to come up with a rating from 1 to 9 and come up with, you know, potential issues, potential improvements they could have done, things like that. Okay, so we will be going to the breakout rooms now. And you can select which ones you want to go to. We had only one person join the advanced group, Nancy, but we just ended up doing two groups reviewing the same proposal, which was Isabel's proposal that she graciously agreed to have us critique. So any, we only have a couple minutes, but any kind of feedback, overall impressions of the proposal that you want to report out from either of the 2 groups? I think I can summarize our group. I think that, you know, in our group, we talked about the significance being pretty high. There were some questions about the need for looking at eye tracking. Is that really relevant and a real problem? On the innovation side, we thought it was really innovative using eye tracking. And there were some methodological issues that we kind of discussed with, the actual simulator of using bag mass ventilation on the mannequin might be difficult. And also, the lack of correlation of the eye tracking to the actual performance, sim-based performance. So that's super quick summary, I think, from our side. We didn't really get to a final score, but people were saying, 2 and 3 on significance, 1 to 2 on innovation. We haven't really gotten to methodology, but anyone else have feedback from either our group or the other group?
I can say from my group, we have very limited time to read, but still, I think that we did a very quick scan of the proposal, and it was actually very easy to follow Isabella's proposal. Even you have like a 2 minutes, and we can just quickly read through 3 pages that we were able to do because of the layout, what appropriately labeled, what's discussed in which section, and the space that the things you talked about.
Great. Does anyone have any final thoughts or questions? We only have about 1 or 2 minutes left, and we're already over time. Any questions or comments? I just put my email in the chat if you want to follow up. And again, go to the Dropbox folder. There's some resources in there. There's my Biosketch example. There were these slides that have the funding opportunities. There are some more slides from a different workshop. There are some grant writing notes that I took when I took a grant writing workshop a long time ago. So check that out. Hopefully that can be a resource later on. But in the meantime, again, just want to plug that the DEI award for INSPIRE is coming up on September 30th. So do reach out if you have any questions. I put my email in the chat if you ever want to discuss further, or if you want a letter of support from INSPIRE or want to talk more about the application, feel free to reach out. So if we don't have any final parting thoughts from anyone, last opportunity. Any feedback from the workshop besides the lack of time?
It was, I think, excellent workshop, especially to give us an overview or an idea. So thank you so much for having organizing that to all the faculty members. It's really appreciated.
Thanks so much, Javine.
Excellent workshop, Travis.
Yeah, thanks so much. All right, let's see what's next. Aaron.